like an angry dog. My thoughts were loud, screaming in a unified chorus. Take it, take it, take it. That's all I cared about, all I wanted in the world. To take it meant the end of this horrible night, to live through it. I pried desperately at his grubby fingers, feeling them starting to break their hold. As from out of nowhere, a calloused fist struck my face. Pressure filled the inside of my cheek and made it clench. His free hand struck again, even harder this time. My head flopped back, but my hands only clutched tighter. Then there was a sound behind me, and a pair of hands ripped me right out of the driver's seat. The underside of my legs scraped painfully across the gravel, and before everything stopped spinning, I was pinned on my stomach. A broad knee dug between my shoulders. Something looped around my wrists and then bit into them as tight bracelets. Zip ties. Easy, easy, guy. A new voice spoke, infuriatingly calm. I heard the passenger side close as Goatbeard bustled over to join whoever had a hold of me. I spat and cursed at them, feeling sharp bits of grit push into my cheek. He's a troublemaker, Goatbeard jeered, hawking a gob of mucus on me. My teeth ached and the blood was rushing to my left cheek, probably swelling like a balloon. Without warning, the two men yanked me up to my knees, crammed something into my mouth, and slapped a streak of duct tape over my lips. That'll put a muzzle on him, Goatbeard chuckled, proud of himself. The man who had pushed his fingers into my mouth nodded. He was much taller, with a bristled, frosty chin and a nose permanently bent to the side. Listen, he spoke with that collected voice. If you keep causing trouble, I'll have to take this... He held up a knife and pressed it up to my groin. And unzip your sack, so behave, huh? I stopped struggling at the sight of it. Whatever they'd just shoved in my mouth rolled along my tongue. It felt like a tablet, some kind of drug maybe. In no way was I going to swallow it, but that wouldn't stop it from dissolving anyway. We need to hurry, Goatbeard mumbled, to which Bentnose nodded and led me into the wrecked building. Inside, they walked me down a short, cramped hallway. The air I had to force in and out of my nostrils was stale and feverishly thick. Mold had built up and crawled down the hall from the ceiling, trailing along the cracks. The interior in the room we entered resembled a kind of workshop, somewhat lit by a flashlight propped up on a table. In its beam, someone else had their back to us, a hunching figure with a veiny, bald head and a rawhide coat that hung off his wiry frame. He was dipping his fingers into what looked like a jar and smearing it in oval strokes on the wall, humming a hymn while he did so. Piled along the left flank of the wall were heaps of worn medical equipment, pushed aside and left in a dusty pile. Paper and negatives from an X-ray were littered all over the floor. This was a hospital, or at least something along the lines of one. Behind the mound of grimy equipment, a woman was hunched against the wall. Her dark eyes peered up from the duct tape, cheeks creased with eyeshadow, and her face sagging with the weight of hopelessness. As our eyes met, neither found comfort in the other. I felt the urge to gag as the thing in my mouth melted into a bitter glaze. It tasted horrible. Are we ready? Goatbeard asked from behind me, his gun pressed firmly into my spine. Almost, Skinny replied, turning his pointy face towards us before returning to the thing he was creating. His wide eyes held a fierce intensity behind them. Bentnose joined him, grabbing a jar of his own and streaking the same circled pattern over the next half of the room. Dozens were on the walls, large red circles filled with 6 inner rings. Grayish chalky writing had been scribbled into them. Not words at all, but layers upon layers of gibberish, all winding toward the sphere's center. They seemed like sigils, like ones you might find in a cult. That explained Goatbeard's crazy speak, but what was this really? Our captors didn't strike me as cultists with robes and hidden hooded faces. They were more a gang of scruffy misfits showing off their toys. I looked at the woman. Her eyes had gone somewhere, swaying and wobbling around the room. Muffled, droning sounds buzzed behind the duct tape. She was on something. Probably the same thing they force-fed me to keep us muzzled. All right, Skinny spoke excitedly, clapping his spattered hands. Who should we start with? Her, Bentnose spoke, gesturing to the girl who continued to sway and teeter in her corner. Skinny looked at the woman and then blinked back at him with irritation. What are you doing? Where are her restraints? Bent Nose scoffed at him. She's high as a kite. Wouldn't even notice a fly on her face right now. That isn't the point, Skinny snapped. Do you want this to end up like the Mosleys? Think. Musing on that, Bent Nose fastened the cables over her wrists and yanked her off the ground, her bare feet dragging along the floor. As she was laid in the center of the room, she rested whimsically on her back. He ripped the duct tape from her mouth before leaving her there. A pause fell over the room, and then the men began to chant in unison. It swelled from their throats, pulling straight from the chest and meshing together into a low, prolonged baritone. In the poor acoustics of the room, their voices bounced off the stained walls, gaining more volume with an unmistakable, deep, powerful devotion. Between their vocals, Skinny spoke out, straining his lungs into some gravel throat language. I was starting to feel clammy and prickly all over the place. My mind focused on breathing, sucking in the awful fumes around me of body odor and decay. As my heart pumped frantically, I tried to focus on its rhythm, tried to ignore the sounds of vibrating vocal cords rumbling my ears. I forced down a swallow and breathed. The drug couldn't be affecting me now, could it? This quickly? The walls around us didn't feel like walls anymore, but massive slabs of canvas coated in waxy circles. Awful art. Horrible, awful art. The voices rose, heaving out their vocals even louder. My leg muscles squeezed together, then relaxed, like taffy being rolled and stretched from a machine. I wanted to sit down and breathe, but as I started to drift downward, Goatbeard forcibly hoisted me back up again. I'd forgotten he was there. Are you feeling it? Are you feeling the good shit yet? His words trickled with them a warm, rotten breath. Whatever harness keeping my thoughts together was loosening. I wanted to squeeze into one of the cracks around us, to sleep and to make the bad world go away. The walls started to move, puffing in and out in perfect tandem with my squeezing chest. In, out, in, out. Even the sigils moved, shivering their waxy bodies with the dark course. Within them, the chalky figures danced and wriggled with such life, I almost believed they each had their own pulse. That was when I saw the fire. It clawed over her, starting as a bluish ripple that quickly flared into a bright, savage red. Even as the burst of heat rolled over my face, I didn't think it was real. The men hadn't ignited her or doused her in anything or even flicked a match. A hallucination. That's it. I'm hallucinating. My mind pleaded, trying to grasp its last fibers of that harness, but the sound of her screaming was what made it real. She bucked and writhed beneath the flames, crying out for any of us to help her. Smoke burrowed into my nostrils and bristled the back of my throat. I retched emptily into the duct tape and tried to pull away, only to be forced back toward her. Watch! Goatbeard hissed, only stopping his chance to whisper into my ear. Watch the angel shine. I could smell her hair burning, her skin roasting. Faces appeared around her, forming with the blaze, and then in the same instant, rippled into the smog. She screamed until her throat split and her echoes fell to a dry, breathless yowl. The ties bounding her hands had finally snapped and released them to flail helplessly about. All the while, the strident chants continued, feeding the inferno as it spat more pieces of her into the air. They sang, they cheered, and as their shadows throbbed up and down the walls, I could swear those changed as well. Oily shapes with bodies contorted and tortuously stretched into things not even remotely human. Skinny stood closest to the burning woman, both hands raised in sadistic glee over their living kindle. Just another man outside these walls, but here in the firelight, he looked like the devil. Psychopaths. Monsters. I fought in Goatbeard's grip, jerking my head back to break his nose, kicking my feet backwards towards his knees. I couldn't stomach anymore. Something blunt struck the back of my head. I keeled over onto my knees. Even in a drugged-up daze, the static spreading around my skull told me I'd just been pistol-whipped. The last of the strained cries finally crept from the woman's throat as she succumbed to a crackling silence. I thought she was finally gone, prayed for it even. However, she convulsed once more, turning her stomach up and letting her head hang downward, now looking at me. I saw her face clearly, her skin resurfaced with blisters and curling raw patches, her nose a molted stump of white searing tissue, and the last remnants of her hair coiling against a ruined scalp. Then her lips, which had dried to thin scabs, suddenly parted. I expected another hellish scream to empty out of her, but it was something else. A warped laugh, only possible with a throat full of charcoal, laughing hysterically in an upside-down grimace. Though no eyes were left in her sockets, I could feel their gaze swallow me up. "Stop!" I whimpered internally. "Please, stop looking at me!" Her suffering had ended, but something different had taken its place, clawing its way out of the burn. The laughing ceased as she struggled back to her feet, standing tall in the lashing flames. Fragments of clothing hung from her grizzled frame, fused to the skin. The chorus of men had stopped as they backed away from her, like lion tamers who had suddenly lost their whips. She seemed to pay them no mind as her neck slowly swiveled around the room, eyeing up each of the hastily smeared sigils. Her heels scraped against the floor as she chose one of them and gradually shambled toward it. Upon reaching the first crest, her body collapsed forward. A skull-rendering crunch resounded from the impact and left her limply against it. Pieces of her torso, followed by everything else, began to fall away from her, dispersing in blackened particles. The flame shrank and sputtered as more of her body broke down into fine-grained piles around her. Before long, she had succumbed to nothingness, a vague smear of her existence marred into the wall. As the last of the embers fizzled in their ashes, the room returned to its heavy darkness. "Beautiful!" Skinny cheered, looking like he'd just wiped away a tear, though it was probably to rub the sweat off his face. Those wide, intense eyes traveled to me. "One down, one to go." I looked once more at the crest on the wall, smothered by the leftover shape of a woman. Then I was on the ground, staring up at the ceiling. They'd left me in the same spot, peppered with her ashes. Beneath me, the scorched floor burned against my spine. Goatbeard smiled as he tore the duct tape from my mouth. Why? So they could hear me scream next? My limbs had jellied into uselessness, maybe from the fear or maybe from whatever god-forsaken substance they'd forced into my system. Tears welled up in my eyes. I thought about my parents' faces and the last time I'd seen them. I thought about my first bar gig and how many times I had messed up the mixes, but was rasped short by how raw it had become. I didn't want to die. Not here. Not in this demonic place. When the chanting started again, I squeezed the tears shut and prayed for my nerves to burn quickly. Then the sound stopped. Silence stilled the room, save for a few scraping feet. "What was that?" Bentnose spoke. "You hear that? I'll go check it out." Skinny ordered as a set of shoes pattered out of the room. A few anxious mumbles passed between him and Goatbeard until a flurry of shouts rang from the hallway. Both of them beat past me and ran toward the disturbance. Something surged through my body, an electricity which kicked my limbs from their paralysis and back to working order. I pulled my upper half from the ground and into a sitting position. Once my feet were under me, I got myself back to standing. Just being vertical again filled me with absolute joy. The sound from outside came as incoherent barks from the hall until they were silenced by a loud crack, then two more in its place. Gunshots. I pulled my arms below my body and carefully lifted one leg at a time over my wrists, bringing them back to the front of me. After that, I brought both over my head and threw them down into my stomach. The ties didn't break. I tried again, raising them as high as I could. "Break, you bastards!" and slammed them down even harder. The locking mechanism snapped, finally freeing my hands. From behind the thin walls, shuffling movements registered from the outside.
"My ear!"
A voice bellowed, sounding very much like Goatbeard's slurred speech.
"Stop my fucking ear!"
Car doors opened and closed as an engine revved to life and an accelerator was depressed. They sped off, retreating from something. As I twisted myself toward the exit, a man was now standing there, his gun pointed at me. "Stay away!" I screamed haggardly at him. Stay the hell away from me! Take it easy. I'm not one of them, the man said, lowering his weapon. A whole new face in the fray. We stood at an impasse inside the acrid, unlit room. I wanted to believe he was my rescue, but my nerves were shot. The fact that things around me hadn't stopped moving didn't help. His eyes scanned the workshop and settled on the human-shaped scar on the wall. A look of familiarity tensed his features. Do you know where you are right now? Were you forced to come here? Please, I breathed. Just let me get out of this place. He nodded in agreement and led the way through the narrow hallway. The fresh night air prickled down my throat and coughed back out of me. I bent over and retched into the ground. The ashes were all over me, on my clothes, in my hair. The stranger retreated from me, almost like he was expecting something to suddenly happen. When nothing did, he cautiously drew closer. My name's Tucker. Can you tell me yours? Peter, I responded, blowing the remaining spittle off my lips. Are you a cop? I used to be. He itched the back of his neck, then continued. I need you to tell me everything that happened here, Peter. Everything that you can remember. Can you do that for me? I looked up at him and rubbed the imprints dented into my wrists. You aren't going to believe any of it. The ex-officer then smiled. Try me. Hello there. I guess you could say I'm recording this as a cautionary tale to those who plan on studying abroad in the future. I don't mean to discourage you from going in the first place. It's more like I want you to be aware of this, so that something like this doesn't happen to you. I guess I should explain a little bit. Last summer, I was selected to participate in the study abroad program that would be centered in Rome for several months. Like anyone would be, I was elated. I had never been out of the States before, so this was going to be a real adventure for me. In the weeks that followed, I happily packed anything and everything I could fit in my suitcase. I will be the first to admit that I had definitely overpacked for this trip. I was nervous about leaving my parents for the first time, but I was also excited for the newfound freedom I would have while in Europe. Before I knew it, my parents were dropping me off at the airport, and I was boarding a 19-hour flight to Rome. Despite being long and tedious, the flight wasn't all that bad. When I exited the airport, I was greeted by the program supervisor and several other students who would be studying with me. They were all about the same age as me. From there, we went to our mandatory orientation meeting, and afterwards, we went to pick up our apartment keys. In the months that preceded the trip, we were responsible for getting to know our would-be roommates as well as finding a place to stay that we could all afford. There were 3 girls I would be staying with. They were all nice enough and made an effort to make me feel welcome, though I will admit it's a bit hard to get close to a group of pre-formed friends. But despite my slight alienation, it seemed that things were all going to work out well. All of us were on a similar budget plan, and by that I mean none of us really had much money to spend. Because of this, we were all on the same page while searching for the cheapest apartment we could find. After several days of searching, we stumbled across an ad for an ancient apartment located above the Campo di Fiori. That was a prime location, and we couldn't believe that it was still available, no less listed for an unbelievably low price. This immediately set alarm bells off in my head. The place was enormous, yet the rent was cheaper than the much smaller apartments in far less desirable parts of town. However, reason never really wins out in a group of excited young women. They had already made up their minds, and if I would be staying with them, this was my only option. We each received our own set of keys as well as a map with walking directions. Because of its prime location, it really didn't take us long to get there. The Campo was amazing. During the daytime, it was filled with a vibrant market, while during the evening, it was lined with lively street performers. All of the apartments surrounding it looked to be ancient, so ours really didn't stand out all that much. After circling the square 3 or 4 times, we finally noticed the number nailed to the front of the massive old door. This would be our home for the next 3 months. I fought with my keys for a moment until there was an audible click of the heavy lock. The thick old door swung forward with a screech. We were then met with a long winding staircase. We all looked at one another and groaned. None of us had accounted for the fact that the building had been constructed before elevators were common, so 3 sets of stairs and countless complaints later, all 4 of us, with luggage in hand, stood outside of our new front door. Once again, I reached for my set of keys and fought with the stubborn lock. As soon as the front door was opened, there was a stampede of young women trying to claim the best rooms. Being a 3-bedroom apartment, it meant that 2 of us would have to share. I personally didn't really care, so I let the others battle it out. When the dust settled, I found that I would be sharing a room with a girl called Samantha. That was fine with me. Samantha was nice enough, and she was also very quiet, my ideal feature in a roommate. Over the course of the rest of the day, we ran around exploring our new home. There were 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen, and a living room with an ancient TV. Once again, I began to feel uneasy. Just how was it that we were able to get all of this for such a low price? But before I could finish the thought, I was interrupted by a fit of loud squealing. My initial reaction was to panic. However, I soon learned that all the noise was from excitement. Down at the other end of the hall, near the front door, apparently there had been another part of the flat that we had missed. I followed the noise until it led me to a long, dark hallway. There, at the end, behind a group of squealing women, was a washing and drying machine. For those of you thinking, what's the big deal? I should explain that these are incredibly rare in Rome. Generally, exchange students have to wash their clothes by hand in the sink before hanging them up to dry. What was a luxury item like this doing in such a cheap apartment? Just as the screaming quelled, it picked right back up again as the girls noticed a door adjacent to the washing machine. Beyond that door was a master bathroom. It had a balcony, a clawfoot tub, and even a bidet. The girls immediately starting over whose bathroom this was going to be. I didn't really see why we couldn't share, but apparently the others were dead set on having ownership. As it turned out, it ended up being my bathroom. Stephanie had made a logical argument that because she and I had to share a bedroom, while the other 2 each got their own, it was only fair that she and I got to share the master bathroom. And I'll admit that at first, I was actually kind of excited. It was, after all, a really nice room. However, over the course of the next several weeks, I began to grow more and more wary of the room. I didn't know how to put it into words. It was like every time I went into that room, I could feel something's eyes on me, and the voyeuristic element wasn't really what had me so unnerved. It felt like whatever was watching me was angry, that it didn't want me there, and that it wanted to hurt me. I began doing everything in my power to avoid the room. I asked Alicia if she would mind if I were to use her restroom occasionally. I made up an excuse about how it was far more convenient, since her room was so close, while my bathroom was at the other end of the flat, at the end of a very long hallway. She happily agreed, though, when I told her that she could use my bathroom anytime she liked. This worked well for a while. For about the first 2 months of my trip, I was able to completely avoid the eerie room. It wasn't until the final month that everything began to unravel. One night, as I prepared to brush my teeth, I found that Alicia was already occupying her bathroom. I could hear giggles coming from down the hallway. It was clear both Stephanie and our other roommate were both getting ready for bed in the master bath. I decided that since there was strength in numbers, it would be all right just for tonight. So I made my way down to the large bathroom, where I joined the boisterous girls in brushing my teeth. They were in the midst of some conversation when Lindsay, Our other roommate had broken into such a furious fit of laughter that she had to lean on the wall for support. But suddenly she jolted upright, as if she had been shocked. We all looked at what had caused her reaction. There, on the wall, about the same level as the bathtub, was a tiny door. None of us had noticed it because it was the same color as the walls. The landlord had even painted over it. Naturally, this made me a bit nervous. Whatever it was, the landlord clearly didn't want anyone opening it. But, as usual, throwing all caution to the wind, Lindsay reached for the handle and began tugging with all her might. Stephanie clucked her tongue in disapproval before pulling out a small pocket knife. She began delicately carving along the seam of the door. I wanted to beg her to stop, but I really didn't have energy to argue that night. So, within a few minutes, Lindsay had yanked the little door open with a loud crack. It was a crawl space. It was fairly large. My guess would have been you could fit at least 3 or 4 people in there. I was rather curious as to why the landlord would have sealed up an empty little room. While I thought about this, Stephanie and Lindsay began calling for Alicia to come see their new discovery. She was just as excited as they were when they first discovered it. However, as could be expected, this excitement waned over time, and eventually the crawl space was just turned into storage for a few towels and laundry baskets. In the following days after the unsealing of the crawl space, things started to go from eerie to downright terrifying. Annoyingly, Alicia had changed her nightly routine so that I could no longer use her bathroom in the evenings. Once again, I was back in the large bathroom. All the while, the feeling that I was being watched growing worse and worse. I began to get so paranoid each time I went into that room that I would literally jump at the slightest noise of pipes settling, and as soon as I was finished, I would run at full speed down the hallway and close the door behind me. For some reason, I seemed to be the only one feeling this way. It's not like I could have told the girls either. I was already enough of an outcast as it was, so I just kept to myself and hoped it would go away eventually. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself alone in the bathroom. As I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth, something set the hairs on the back of my neck straight up. There was a faint rustling noise, not the kind that would have been caused by my roommates at the other end of the flat. Any noises caused by them would have to have been quite loud to reach me all the way at the end of the long hallway. No, this noise was very faint. The sound of someone gingerly shifting things around. I stood completely silent, terror filling me. The soft rustling noise was coming from inside the crawl space. I turned on my heels and ran down the hallway to grab the attention of my roommates. I tried to explain to them what happened, but all that came out were incoherent murmurs. Eventually, I managed to stutter. Something's in the crawl space. They looked at me with fear and confusion in their eyes. As a pack, we moved together down the hallway into the bathroom. I nearly fainted when I saw the tiny door hanging fully ajar. Though this discovery filled me with horror, Alicia immediately pointed to the balcony's sliding door. Stephanie had left it open to air out the bathroom after having taken a shower a few hours ago. She peeked her head out the door and pointed to the slanted rooftop adjacent to ours. There was a pigeon's nest occupied by a few birds. The girl surmised that a pigeon must have found its way in and was the cause of the disturbance. They all had a good laugh as we made our way back to the living room. I pretended to shake it off, but I knew it was not a pigeon that caused the rustling noise. First off, the tiny door had been shut all day. None of us really cared to leave it open because it smelled quite musty inside. And secondly, the door had been shut when I left the bathroom. I'm certain of this. Yet there it was, wide open when I returned. You're not going to tell me that a pigeon knows how to and is capable of opening and closing a door all by itself. It was at this point that I began to suspect that something was terribly wrong with this apartment. When I got back to my room, I pulled out my laptop and called my best friend via Skype. She had always been the skeptical and methodical type. However, she also kept an open mind towards things that were hard to explain. I decided that out of anyone, she was probably the best to talk to about my situation. As I expected, she was initially quite doubtful, though she also agreed with me that a pigeon was quite likely not the source. She asked me if I had any photos of the crawl space. She said that if she could see it, that would help her understand a little more clearly, and possibly help her to come up with a more logical explanation. Relieved at her willingness to at least hear me out, I reached for my camera and made my way back down the eerie hallway. When I arrived, I found, to my relief, that the door was still closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, gathering my nerves before finally pulling the little door open. Despite the clutter left inside by my roommates, it was empty. I snapped a quick photo before closing the door once more and running back to my room. I immediately plugged my camera into my computer and uploaded the photo. When I finally opened the image, I was petrified by what I saw. There, in the upper right corner, was a face baring its teeth at me. My whole body began violently shaking. Dear God, that thing is in our home. I muttered to myself. Fear began to overtake me. Someone had sealed whatever it was inside of that crawl space, and we had let it out. I was so absorbed in my panic, I didn't even notice when my roommate returned. She was so blissfully unaware of the imminent danger we were in, yet even if I tried to warn her, she would not believe me. I was at a loss of what to do, and finally decided that I would deal with it in the morning. Though not by a large amount, I did feel braver in the sunlight. From there, I attempted to get some sleep, though, for the first time ever since being there, I closed and bolted my door before getting into bed. Stephanie eyed me suspiciously while doing so, but I just told her jokingly that Lindsay had been sneaking into our room the previous night and had been stealing my Nutella. She laughed heartily, shaking her head before settling down for the night. I will admit that the only reason I was able to find any sleep that night was because of her presence. Something about not being alone can give one a sense of false security. It was about 2 in the morning when the sound woke me. I'd always been a light sleeper, so the faint noise was enough to stir me. It sounded like a door being pushed open at the other end of the flat, followed by footsteps. But these weren't just normal footsteps. They were far too fast. It sounded like someone was running at full speed from the foyer to the living room and all about the apartment. But these weren't heavy footfalls like the kind you would expect from a running person. They were light, almost unnaturally so. So I got up and stuck my ear to the wall behind me that separated Lindsay's room from mine. I could hear her faint but steady breathing. She was clearly asleep. It wasn't her. I then crossed to the other side of the room near the door, and once again stuck my ear to the wall. Alicia's snoring was quite audible. There was no way it was her. I slowly began to grow fearful as I turned in a last resort to see if Stephanie had perhaps gotten up, but I could plainly see her resting form silently rising up and down. A shiver went down my spine, and I nearly screamed when I realized that the footsteps had come to a stop outside my door. Despite all the lights being out, I could clearly see the looming dark shadow of a form through the tiny crack at the foot of my door. I dared not move. Whatever it was just standing there, waiting. Then, to my horror, my doorknob slowly began to jiggle. Gently at first, but then growing violently at the realization of it being locked. The noise of it eventually woke my roommate. She sat up, blinking in confusion. That instant, the jiggling of the doorknob stopped. She asked me what the hell I was doing, and if I knew what time it was. I told her that it wasn't me. I told her that whatever had opened the door to the crawl space the previous day had come back, but she just furrowed her brow at me and said that I needed to get more sleep. The next day, I made an appointment with my program supervisor. I told him that I just needed to go home. He tried to tell me that I was just homesick and that it would pass, but I insisted. He eventually gave up and let me call my parents. They were confused but understanding. They were able to change the date of my return flight to the following morning. I really wanted to get out of there that day, but understandably, that was the soonest they could manage. Unfortunately, this meant that I would have to stay one more night in that apartment. When I returned, I tried to tell the others of what had been going on. I knew I was going to be getting out of there and would be out of danger, but I was still immensely worried for their safety. But none of them took me seriously. They looked at me like I was crazy. They didn't say anything, but I was sure they all thought I was going home because of some sort of mental breakdown. At that point, there was nothing I could say that would convince them. So that night, I locked my door and hesitantly went to bed. And right on cue, once again around 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awoken by the rapid footsteps scampering around the apartment. I could hear the door to the bathroom begin to creak open, followed by the door at the end of the hallway. The footsteps grew louder and faster as they moved through the apartment, and finally, once more they came to a pause outside my door. I could hear breathing this time, slow and heavy. I sat up in a panic, and to my horror, I saw that Stephanie had forgotten to lock the door behind her after getting up to use the restroom. It was right outside of my door, and I didn't know if I had time to jump up and try to lock it before the thing realized there was nothing blocking its way. I hesitated a moment too long, and by the time I had sat straight up in bed, the handle slowly began to turn. I froze in terror as the door creaked open, revealing my tormentor. It stood there ominously in the doorway, staring me down. Its eyes protruded slightly from its skull and gave off a very faint bluish light. It didn't appear to have a nose, only slits where the nostrils should have been. It had the teeth of a man, but had no lips, giving it the impression of an eternally toothless snarl. Its grayish-white skin was waxy and stretched tight over its bony face. The rest of its skeletal form was hard to make out, as it was almost entirely enveloped in shadow. After pausing for a moment in the doorway, it began to head towards me. As it moved, its body let out sickening cracks. I sat there, still petrified by fear, until it had made its way to the foot of my bed. Its heavy breaths were deafeningly loud. I don't know how Stephanie slept through it. The air had begun to smell sour and stagnant. With frightening speed, it jolted to the other end of the bed, mere feet from me. I gagged at the smell of it, like sulfur and rotting flesh. Slowly, it unfurled one of its elongated and gnarly hands and proceeded to reach for me. Not until it was several inches away did I finally find my voice. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and it halted in its tracks. Stephanie shot up from her bed, visibly frightened. The creature hunched over on all fours and fled from the room with unsettling movements that recalled those of a spider. A moment later, Stephanie switched the light on and looked at me furiously. She demanded to know what the fuss was all about. I told her exactly what had happened, but she just called me a nutcase. The taxi came to pick me up early the next morning. The sun had not even risen by the time it arrived. None of the girls came to see me off, but I expected this. After loading my luggage into the trunk, I climbed into the back seat of the old cab. It had driven right through the square and was sitting at the base of my apartment. When I leaned to look out the window, I could see where my room had been. My face contorted into a mixture of panic and concern. There, looking out of my window, was the creature. Its unblinking eyes bore into me, and its lipless mouth curled into a snarling grin. Before I could say anything, the cab driver had taken off, leaving that hell house far behind. I tried to warn them. I really did. I did everything in my power to try to warn them of the danger they were in, but none of them listened to me. There was no way I could have stopped what happened after I returned home. You see, several weeks after returning to the United States, I received a phone call from the program director. He informed me that a day after the program ended, all 3 of my past roommates had been reported missing. The authorities had no idea just how long they had actually been gone for, as they were only recently discovered to be missing when the program director went to check on them after none of them made it to the end of the program wrap-up meeting. They assumed it had been at least a week or 2, since all the food in the apartment was expired. There was no sign of forced entry, and no valuables were missing. The only notable detail mentioned in the report was when they arrived on the scene, there was a strange little door hanging ajar in the bathroom. When they approached it, they were met with a powerful odor coming from no visible source. The official report has them declared as missing, but I know that they're all dead. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have made it out with my life, I think the only reason I'm still alive today is because I fled thousands of miles across the ocean. Despite their unwillingness to listen, I still feel an unimaginable amount of guilt over what happened to those girls. That's why I'm recording this now. I may not be able to go back in time and save them, but maybe I can prevent this from happening to you. Please, please heed my warning. If you ever get the opportunity to study abroad, keep this in mind. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And whatever you do, don't stay on the 3rd floor of the ancient yellow apartment complex above the Campo di Fiori. There's something there. Something evil. You have been given a chance. One single opportunity. Just for you, little one. You don't have to endure the tribulations about to be unleashed. You can escape all of that misery. All you have to do
is listen to my voice. As before, it begins the same.
A faint hum vibrates from the sky that tickles the back of your throat. The resonance builds to a thunderous, resounding blast of one of the 7 celestial trumpets. Each time that horrible sound is heard, it has heralded the start of another 3 years of suffering, each more horrifying than the last. 4 times has the trumpet sung its song. Before the echo of the 5th trumpet fades, you will be given a chance to escape. When that familiar tickle reemerges, an object will appear in the sky. As it nears, the intensity of the deep tone grows. You know it is only a matter of time before the deafening blast is heard once more. However, this time, what is to come will be different. The past 4 soundings of the trumpet brought with them disasters never seen in such magnitude, yet you understand what they were. Yes, they were terrifying, but it was all within the realm of your understanding. You know what makes the earth roll and quake. You know why fiery mountains fall from the heavens. Knowledge has freed you from the archaic belief in the supernatural. No longer does such nonsense deceive you into believing the displeasure of a god will call the hurricane, or a curse will summon the cyclone, or a hex will bring down the plague upon you. It is something different that approaches from above. It is an abomination.
It is wormwood.
The Hebrews called him Abaddon the Banished, and the Greek knew him as Apollyon the Destroyer. Life as you knew it is now over, for he holds the keys to the bottomless pit that has imprisoned his army since even before the words "Let there be light" were spoken. Do you remember the first time we spoke, little one? After the 2nd trumpet sounded, you were given a vision of the pools of Nakhura Seshera. If you were able to find the location of those sacred waters, go there now. 3 pools sit at the end of a T-shaped rock formation. As the moon peeks out from the horizon, its crimson light gives the waters the appearance of blood. The higher it rises in the sky, long shadows are cast. Upon the rock, the likeness and resemblance of a man outstretched upon the rocks will appear before you. Stand in the center of the 3 pools. Tread carefully, for you stand before the image of the sacrament laid upon his symbol. Each pool has a name: the pierced left hand, the pierced right hand, the pierced foot. Before you prepare to receive the blessings of the pierced abdomen, it requires you to be anointed with the ethereal spearhead that will now run you through. There is no outward wound, but blood is now seeping internally into the empty places within you. Your body has now become the 4th pool of sacrifice. When you collapse from the pain, ensure that you fall into one of the pools of water. If you fall onto dry earth, you will have missed your only chance to enter the portal, and you will lose the atonement. As punishment, your wounds will be healed, but you will live the remainder of your days marked, as was Cain, hunted by both angel and demon. If successful, you will awaken in a dark, candlelit stone building. lined with pews ending at a great altar. You stand upon the place of worship where the crossroads meet. Behind you are 3 mirrors, very similar in orientation to the pools of water you recently stood before. Shake off the chill from your wet body and make haste, little one. Time moves differently here, and we must move quickly. Look to the altar. Do you see it? There in the shadows, a figure is kneeling in the distance. Slowly and cautiously approach it. The creature is tall and hooded. It should be deep in prayer, whispering strange incantations. If it is not, do not come any closer. Only approach if it is in prayer. Do not interrupt. Any disruption will be considered a great offense, resulting in a painful death for you. Kneel in front of it. Bow your head. Do not make eye contact, and wait. Be patient, and make no mistake, it knows you are there. Once it has considered you and deemed you worthy, it will acknowledge your presence. However, if it decides you are not worthy, well, there isn't really much more that needs to be said now, is there? It will ask you,
Why have you come before me?
Quickly tell it, I seek passage over the bridge. It will take its time before answering.
You lack the knowledge to accomplish such a deed.
Be brave, little one. Once these words depart your lips, there is no turning back. The creature towers above you. I seek the knowledge of the forbidden. I wish to know. What is the image of God? It will slowly lift its head. Close your eyes and shut them tight. You will hear its body creaking like breaking branches of a tree. It leans close, taking in your scent from the air. Its hands hover and encircle over you. The fingers glide in the air, following the shape and curves of your body, coming ever so close but never quite touching you. A deep, quivering exhale of breath escapes the creature's mouth, and it makes contact with your skin. It caresses your face with one hand, as the other rises slowly to embrace your head from the nape of the neck. Its bony fingers envelop your entire head from behind. Even with your eyes closed and its mouth unseen, you can tell it is pleased with what it holds. You can tell it is smiling. It will grab you by the wrist and lift you off the ground. The ferocity of its grip is both sensual and violent. You're helplessly dangled above the ground as it brings you closer to the face hidden in the shadows, underneath its dark and worn hood. Its breath coats your face with a prickly dust that stings your skin. Droplets of saliva fall from its mouth and hit the ground as a scabbed tongue emerges from underneath the hood. It slides and probes the entire surface of your face until it finds particular interest in where your eyes rest. It is here where it wants to enter. The cold, lumpy tongue will start pushing and poking, squeezing and groping the tops of each eyeball through your eyelids. Pressure builds in your head from your closed eyelids as it continues to violate the fragile organs that hide behind your thin eyelids. The scabs feel like hundreds of little fingers. Its fingernails quickly find where your eyelids meet and begin to scratch viciously to try to pry them open. Shut your eyes tighter. The little fingers intensify their efforts to dig into your eyes with raw and obscene desperation. One of the scabby protrusions bursts, coating your face in a hot, sticky, tar-like fluid that slightly burns. The putrid afterbirth from the abscess spill onto you as the tongue continues to throb relentlessly on the surface of your closed eyes. Suddenly, the tongue withdraws and there is silence. Keep your eyes shut and wait. Eventually, you begin to make out a faint sound coming from the being. It is a cross between a moan and a hum. It is not quite a voice singing, as there is no melody to the sound, but like melodic singing, there is a flow to the tones and variation in the intonation. Listen carefully, as the words will emerge for you to hear.
It happened after the sons of Adam had multiplied in those days. The angels, the children of heaven, beheld them, and some became enamored with the image from whence he was created. They conspired amongst each other and said, "Come, let us select for ourselves from the progeny of men." And so we were drawn onto them by insatiable hunger and thirst, a sensation unfamiliar to our kind. We then swore all together and all bound ourselves by mutual execrations to abandon our holy station. We descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armin, and devoured all which the labor of men produced. To our delight, the flesh of man cried out to us in return and embraced our new form. They loved us, and we came to love them. Never had such pleasures of skin, pleasures of sight, pleasures of tongue, and pleasures of mind been experienced by any living thing. Man was shown the wondrous transcendence of the grotesque and reveled in the vile decadence of purity. During our time together, we taught them sorcery and incantations. We gave them knowledge of the forging of metal and healing with herbs. We instructed them in ways of agriculture and mathematics. We revealed power so great it allowed them to command the atom from within the rocks of the mountain and from the water of the sea. We freed their minds and released them from the enslavement of the Father. In turn, they worshipped us as their love for us strengthened. They basked in our adoration, but it was not true love we bestowed. It was deception. Our actions and deeds came with dire consequences. We had angered the Creator and desecrated his creation. Mad with rage, the Father plunged his hands into the fabric of reality and altered the delicate strands of fate and possibilities. With this divine manipulation, he altered the pattern and set into motion a new future in the predestined plan. We had been judged. We had condemned ourselves and humanity to an eternity of suffering and pain. Our bodies would be scorched and burned until the end of time in a lake of fire and brimstone. However, all was not lost, for we had discovered the forbidden secret. Man, they were our true salvation. We prepared and molded them in our image, and when they were ready, we begot the Nephilim.
It will lean closer and whisper into your ear ever so softly.
I shall grant thee thy request, for it is the seed of the holiest of lies, the very lie that brought forth original sin. A great harvest will come about from that seed, a seed that is the very fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. It is such forbidden knowledge that binds the Creator to the laws of his creation, a way to deceive the eyes of the one who is all-seeing and thwart the mind of the one who is all-knowing. But be warned, for if I bestow this wisdom onto thee, forever will it restrain thee to my will. Behold, the answer thou seek is, thou art not of the image.
Then it stops. You are alone in the darkness. Slowly open your eyes. I know you are scared, little one, but it is safe now. Get to your feet. The great altar has split open and revealed an entrance that allows you to proceed onward. The pain in your side must be getting worse by now. I can see a protrusion the size of an apple has formed on your side. You don't have much time. Enter the altar and move on. You enter a large opening with a dark ravine separating you and a structure containing stairs, leading up to what appears to be a temple. From the ravine grows thick black thorns that slightly sway, even though there is no wind. Their points glisten with a substance that can only be poison. Do not get too close. In the center of the ravine is a single pathway that juts up from the thicket of needles and thorns that will provide you a safe passage to walk on. The pathway ends at the far end, to the foot of the stairways of the temple. At the top of the stairs, there will be 4 thorns, where the ones known as the 4 living creatures reign. They are covered with eyes in front and in the back, and they look down on you with an unnerving, mischievous stare. The first living creature is that of a lion, the second is like an ox, the third will have the face of a man, and the fourth is like a great eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures will have 6 wings covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. At the foot of each creature, a body on its knees chants continuously before them. Their faces look up to the sky, and their arms pulled and stretched outward by barbed shackles embedded into their flesh. The monocles stretch and contort their limbs to mimic the act of eternal worship. Its flesh is bleached white and heavily scarred from head to toe. It wears a blood-red smock from its waist down to its feet and holds a dirty curved blade in its hand. Branded on their backs is a rune that bears the resemblance of a cross with hooked ends. Consider yourself fortunate they have their backs towards you. Consider yourself fortunate they have their backs toward you, and their mutilated faces are obscured from your view. They are the Bai-Ish. Cautiously move past them. The Bai-Ish were 4 men, great kings and leaders of the world. They ruled vast lands that ran red with innocent blood from every man, woman, and child who had the misfortune of being born into their kingdom. The 4 kings were like grown children, spoiled and naked, fighting each other, biting and gnawing at the teats of their great mother Earth, her face beaten and scratched from when they would feed so viciously. They knew only to gorge on her black milk that flowed from deep within her bosom. Their greed and decadence, their very existence offended all who could peer into your world. Their wicked lives were ended the day they were raptured and bound like statues within the walls of this great temple. They must now worship the 4 living creatures, as they once commanded others to worship them in life. They suffer now, as their kingdom suffered. For every son and daughter who found death from fighting the wars they created, their skin is blistered and torn, and their eyes are stung with the venom from the tails of 1,000 scorpions. But be warned, if they are awakened from their trance and given use of their limbs once again, one can be well assured they would not be too pleasant. In unison, the 4 creatures will hold up a key, each with a unique emblem on its end, and speaks. The first creature that looks like a lion will offer you its key and say,
Acquiesce.
The ox will offer you its key and say,
Leviathan.
The third creature with the face like a man offers its key and says,
Clithridiate.
Lastly, the creature that is like an eagle will offer you the final key and say,
Scytherism.
As the last key is presented, you hear brittle crackling, like autumn leaves from the movement of dead skin from behind you, followed by the loud clank of chains falling to the ground. Make your choice. Make it quickly. The Bai-Ish are beginning to stir. Once they see you, they will catch you, and they will kill you. Make your choice. You will know which one to choose, I promise. Take the key and run. Run faster. Run faster. They are coming. Their howls are high-pitched gurgles and hisses. The screeches build as they close the distance between you and them. The slices of their blades come closer and closer. The blood pouring out of your mouth and nose cannot slow you down. Run faster. Run faster. Do not stop until you reach the church of worship. Head straight for the dark glass you saw when you first awoke in the church. Do not slow down. Run head first into it. Crash into the mirror. Do not look back. Do not look back. Whatever you do, do not look back. You will awaken shortly. The pools of water are now dried up earth, cracked and barren. The moon should be at its peak height in the sky, covering the land in its red glow. In the distance of the plain, you should see a piercing shimmer of light. It is only temporary. As the moon loses its red shade, the beacon too begins to diminish in darkness. I am sorry you are in so much pain, dearest little one. It pains me to ask any more of you. Your body has so little left to give. It is so weak and fragile. But I must ask one last thing of you. One final plea I must beg of you. You must reach that beacon of light in the distance before that last of the red moon shines down upon it, or you will be trapped. I am here for you. Push aside all pain and despair. Listen to my voice and use everything you have left to get to the light.
Now!
Abaddon is here. Even from miles away, his arrival knocks you off your feet. Get up, little one. There isn't much time. Abaddon is near, and his thoughts are of nothing but you. You see the brilliant beam of light shoot up into the sky. The source of this powerful beacon comes from an archway standing on an empty plain. Within the archway is a massive and majestic door standing in the emptiness. With the key in hand, you must get that door open before the red moon shines down upon it no more, and any hope of saving you is lost forever. Ignore the wheezing sound you make when you breathe. Pull open that door. The blood on your hands is everywhere, making it hard for you to get a good grip on the door handle. Pull harder. You only need to open it enough for you to squeeze through. The light is almost gone. Pull! 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 You did it. Get inside and shut that door as fast as you can and lock it. The light is gone. It is done. If you place your ear to the door, you may hear something that sounds like buzzing or fluttering, a sound that can only be made by the flapping of millions of wings. There will be scraping, and there will be beating on the other side of the great door. Then only screams. Behind you is a large, dark tunnel with a light at the end. Walk into the light and claim your reward, my little one. I walked into the bright light. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the brightness, but I could already feel a warm breeze on my face and hear a trickling from a nearby stream. Everything slowly comes into focus. The most beautiful valley spanned out in front of me. It was made of hills and green, sprinkled with every color imaginable, where the most beautiful flowers peppered the landscape. I walked towards the clearing and I saw a crystal blue pond. I dipped my cupped hands into the water and drank. It soothed my chapped lips and parched throat. It was amazingly sweet, and there was an odd sensation as I swallowed the water. It was like a shock from a tiny bit of electricity, but without any pain, only satisfaction. I then caught the scent of something new and intoxicating. On the far side of the pond was a gathering of trees. I instantly knew that among these there was one that is the source of that unceasing smell. I knew there was no other like it. Its leaves, its flower, and its bark would never wither, and its fruit would be so beautiful and delicious. As I approached the border of the foliage, that's when I saw them, a man and woman. I froze. The couple were walking hand in hand. I think they're naked. I made my way closer, making sure to stay hidden behind the bush. I don't know why I was hiding from view. Why should I be afraid of a couple of naked people? Yep, they were definitely naked. I looked around and realized that my tree was at the center of the grove that held this paradise. But next to my tree was another tree. It was just as majestic and impressive, but there was something ominous about it, something powerful. I looked carefully at these two unique and special trees that grew in this garden. I now realized what this place was and where I am. I'm startled when I feel something vibrate in my pocket. It was the key I chose. As I removed the large key from my pocket and opened my palm, I noticed the markings on its emblem in more detail. When it was offered to me by the winged creature, I simply thought it was marked with the infinity symbol. Upon closer look, now I realized it was a serpent devouring its own tail in the shape of the infinity symbol. My mind was unlocked. It was all so clear now. I knew my purpose. I knew why I was created. It was always God's will to destroy his creation. Once destroyed, he could fulfill his promise to bind his enemies and cast them into the lake of fire, where they would suffer for all eternity. The trumpets were a countdown to his planned end. Those branded the enemy had spent their immortality trying to find a way to prevent it from happening. But how do you outsmart an omniscient and omnipresent being? You use the very laws of existence against him. For with the creation of the universe, laws had to be created. He had no choice but to subject himself to those laws for the universe to exist. The fallen ones realized the only way to prevent the end was to break the predestined, inevitable chain of events leading to the end. They must have figured out how to connect 2 points of existence, creating a bridge for me to enter. It causes everything to stop and reset back to the very beginning instead of continuing along the predestined path. It never ends. It never reaches Judgment Day. Existence was a loop. We are destined to keep repeating it over and over and over again to escape damnation. It was infinity. Like the serpent devouring its tail, the serpent was thought to be Lucifer, God's adversary, but Lucifer was not a thing or an entity with thought or consciousness. He was the infinity of time, the only thing capable of denying God's divine will. It was the one simple thing that is protecting us from the wrath of an angry God. I felt its familiar presence immediately. I don't turn around, but even if I did, I knew it would not harm me. It stood behind me for a while, quietly admiring its work. It gently placed a large and cold object in my hands before the fallen angel spoke the words that would be my final